Welcome back to the Seedy AF podcast. I'm Jocelyn.
And I'm the Omega. We're thrilled to have you here for another episode where we explore the world of adult game development. Now, let's get seedy.
In today's episode, we'll be answering a few related questions from one of our Patreon supporters. Thank you, Nick, for sending in your questions.
Nick originally asked us, how much did it cost to get all the programs and equipment you needed to start making games? And do you have tips for someone interested in making games themselves? We felt like these were great questions to answer together since finances can make a huge impact during the early days of development.
I feel like we should preface this whole episode with a bit of a disclaimer. We have a lot of years of experience in this business. We have been in it to some extent since 2017, which is pretty much the beginning of these adult games coming to the Western market. And we also know a lot about how to make our own studio successful. But that doesn't mean that anything that we say is true for any other dev or that it's right for any aspiring dev or that you should take our advice. So this is just our personal perspective and what has worked for us. So take it with a grain of salt, take what works for you and leave the rest. The first thing I always ask aspiring devs that approach me is to be brutally honest with themselves about what their own motives or goals are. And I began asking this question first because as I talked to a lot of different aspiring devs, it became clear to me that sometimes they, at least to me, it didn't seem like they were being truly honest with themselves about what they were hoping the outcome of this would be. And in my experience, having talked to a lot of aspiring devs and knowing a lot of other developers now, to me, there's kind of like 4 different goals or motives that people seem to have for these games. And for everybody, they're weighted differently. So everybody prioritizes these differently. But the main motives that I see are, first of all, a passion or hobby project. So they just feel compelled to create something, to make art. They have a vision that they want to execute, and they don't necessarily care a lot about how much money it's going to earn, if it earns any money at all. They just want to do it for the fun of it. And I think a lot of people make these games because they really like interacting with the individual fans that enjoy it or a small community of fans on their Discord, on their Patreon. I think for some developers, they enjoy more reaching a large amount of players, reaching a really wide audience and seeing that lots and lots of people have played their games. And lastly, I think that most developers, some are more honest with themselves about it than others, really do hope to make money. And I don't mean make money like become super rich or anything like that, but just make enough money that they feel like the work was worth it. Although when I press developers on this or aspiring developers, a lot of them do admit that they are hoping that eventually this is going to become a full-time job for them like it is for us. And so I think that's something just to be really honest with yourself from the very beginning, because it will impact decisions that you make. If your goal is to eventually make some money, whether that's just enough to consider it a hobby project that makes you a little bit of money on the side, that pays for itself, or you want to eventually turn it into a full-time job, then you need to make your decisions accordingly. And that doesn't mean that you need to always choose profit over, what you're interested in making or what you think players would like or anything else. You don't always have to choose money first, but there are certainly a few things that if you do them, it will make it very hard to monetize later. And I think for a lot of developers, that can be the point at which they abandon a project, because this is a lot of work. And I think for a lot of players that even if they enjoy interacting with the fans, even if they enjoy reaching a large audience, and even if they're really just passionate about the project that they're making, if they never make any money on it, it is really hard to stay motivated once the shine kind of wears off of some of those other things. And so, that is something that we could get into more in detail in another episode about exactly what are the best decisions you can make in terms of monetizing. But number one, you really have to dig deep, I think, and figure out what your priorities are.
And, just real quick to echo one of the things you said there, like as a game developer, you have to balance your goals and what you're looking for out of it. And, like I said, to echo, like you have to enjoy a lot of what you're making. So don't put yourself in a position like Jocelyn was saying, where you're not enjoying what you're making other than like pursuing that one goal out of it, because then, you're going to hate your life and you're going to lose all the will to continue.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think for sometimes when I press aspiring devs on this, or when we do talk to fans about this, it can kind of sound like what I'm saying is like, well, if you want to make money, then you need to prioritize that over everything. And that's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I agree, no matter what your number one priority is, I can guarantee you that is not going to be enough to sustain you through the entire process. If you're super passionate about your project, in my experience, that is never enough to actually carry you through if none of the other things are true. If no one is playing your game, if you're not making any money, if nobody's interacting with you, then it's really hard to just do something purely for the love of doing it. I mean, not that people don't do it. I've certainly written novels in my life that were just for my own enjoyment, but making an entire adult game is so much work and takes so long that you really need to have multiple things that you can lean on when one thing isn't really working out, when you're just not feeling the passion. Then you can look at the fans that are really excited and use that to motivate you, or you can look at the money that you're getting, the way that your Patreon is growing and things like that. Like, it's just important to have a variety of places that you can draw motivation from.
Another thing I'll say real quick to all this is, it's not wrong. There's no guilt in pursuing, like, trying to make this a full-time job for yourself. And the reality is you're providing, in my opinion, like a creative experience that you're giving to your fans and supporters, whether you're charging them for it or not. You're giving them something that wouldn't exist would you not be doing this in the first place. And there's a reason why movies exist, TV shows exist, and it's to provide that creative experience. And the reality is life would be a boring place if there weren't video games, TV shows, and movies. So just think about that and try to be guilt-free about it if this is something that you're pursuing. That's my opinion on that. Along those lines of what Jocelyn was also mentioning, I think that one of the most important things you can do is to consider doing some actual good market research. And yeah, that means playing the games that are out there, seeing what they do, seeing what kind of content, what kind of themes, what kind of kinks that they offer, how successful they are. And I'm not saying to copy them. I'm not saying to take their themes or to just be cookie cutter. But what I'm saying from that is to just make sure that you have a good understanding of what is currently successful so that you can plan around for your own games and kind of decide what you want to include, what you don't, and what you think might be successful. And then another thing that kind of goes with that is a good way that you can test how something is successful without a lot of risk is to make something small to begin with. And to be honest, that's not something that we did. Both of our games are both kind of large, which is, probably not the greatest decision to start off with, but that's what ended up happening. And, plans change all the time, so that's how that happened. But anyways, if you can do something small to begin with, that's kind of what we would suggest, I think, because that way you can figure out if that's something that the market wants or if that's what players and fans want versus like getting attached to a project that's going to be a multi-year long project and people don't even like it. And then you'll have to end up dropping it. And it's a whole can of worms kind of thing.
For sure. I think that's basically after I ask a developer to be really honest with themselves about what they want. And I always tell them the second thing is to start small, especially I think if you're wanting to make a passion project. Typically when somebody has a vision in their mind of something that they're really passionate about making, that's not something simple. It's something that's very complex. And so that would probably not be the best place to start for a large variety of reasons. One is just that it is so hard that if you start with something big, it's really hard to have the stamina to continue. As the Omega said, we are not necessarily the best example. This is kind of a do as we say, not as we do, because both of our projects are bigger. However, I think that we also just know ourselves and know that we have a really strong work ethic. We have a lot of stamina for really long projects. And so, even though we could have made something smaller, and that probably would have been easier, the fact that we chose to make something bigger hasn't held us back and it won't stop us from developing. But I think that it's fair to say for a lot of developers that if they start too big, then they're just never going to finish. And that's totally fine. You should just start small and work your way up. The other reason that you should start small is because you're going to learn a lot making that first game. And if you start with your passion project, you're going to do a lot of things in the beginning that you can't undo later. And, that's how a lot of developers end up restarting or remastering. So, just take that first project to just kind of learn and practice. And that way you're going to have really much stronger skills and a lot more resources when you go to start that second game. And, about the financial aspect, which is the other topic we want to get into, starting small is a great way to fund your bigger project. So the big passion project that you really want to make, you're going to need money to develop that. So use your smaller game to build a financial base that you can draw from to build that second game. That's always my advice for developers. So speaking of which, I think we should talk a little bit about those startup costs since Nick asked about that. So I'll let the Omega talk about the startup costs for Prince of Suburbia, our first game that we started in 2017, because he was mostly involved in setting that up financially.
And real quick before I get into that, I just want to, not the perfect example, but I think a good example is if you look at Dr. Pinkcake and his games, Acting Lessons and Being a Dick. Acting Lessons is so much smaller than Being a Dick, and Being a Dick is just gargantuan as far as the size in comparison. That being said, acting Lessons might be a bigger game than some developers want to start off with as far as their testbed market. But it's just a good example to look at, going from a small game to a huge game, essentially. So yeah, getting into how much did it cost to get started, that's a fun question. It's also a hard question to answer, really. So let me just give some perspective here and backtrack a little bit. So with Prince Suburbia, as we kind of hinted at in one of our other episodes or talked about, it was very much like I saw what was going on in the market back in 2017. I was super excited and thought they were super cool. So I just wanted to kind of poke at it a little bit and see what would happen. So initially we threw like $4,000 or $5,000 at it and developed it within, I don't know, 3 or 4 months with the sprites. And we had an artist, her name was Scarlet Van, and I hired a programmer to help me get it put together since I was working full time at the time. And yeah, we just kind of started off with Prince Suburbia at that point just to see what would happen. The results were kind of mixed. It drew in, some fans and some money. But anyways, long story short, that was the initial amount. It's 4,000 or 5,000 with Prince Suburbia back in 2017. And another big part of that before we actually started taking things seriously, which was, back in 2021, like in summer, that's when Jocelyn ended up working on Daz full time and really diving into that. I was still working full time in the web dev job. A big part of that was to make sure that we saved up enough money to kind of fund ourselves, as we knew that the plan was for both of us to try to do this full time and make this work. We ended up having to save up money, which was around $30,000 or $35,000 in the bank, and that was a part of me working full time as the web dev side of things before we actually pulled the trigger to start the business, like on a serious note, where that was all we were going to rely upon. So we ended up buying Jocelyn a rendering rig for those static images, which was about $3,500, and then an animation rig, which was about $4,500. And then what we ended up doing is we ended up paying for the assets, like the Daz assets and the 2D assets for Prince Suburbia as we went along. So anything we needed, anything we wanted to set up our scenes with, that's what we would end up buying. And then, of course, anytime there's stuff on sale, like kind of stuff we would look at too.
Yeah, I think that also too, the progression of how we went from a hand-drawn 2D game to a 3D game rendered in Daz Studio is also because one of the things that we learned is that art is really expensive for these games. And so in order to be as lean as possible with the second game, when we were still trying to grow Prince of Suburbia, at that time, Prince of Suburbia, I would say, was maybe paying for itself. It wasn't costing us money, but it also wasn't making us any money. And yeah, we had to save up cash in order to live on the cash and to, get the next game started. So it was very lean, and we wanted to make sure that we were basically doing things as cheaply as we could in order to set things up. And so that was a big motivation for us doing the art ourselves in Daz, and instead of doing another hand-drawn 2D game where we had to pay for the art. And so that's something to think about, is that if you yourself are not an artist, it's very hard to start a hand-drawn 2D game because you have to pay somebody else to do the art. And obviously art is very time-consuming and expensive. However, if you are a 2D hand-drawn artist, I would highly suggest that you make a 2D hand-drawn game, because the reality is that you can save a lot of money making your own art. So I will say too, when we were starting in summer of 2021 to decide, is this something that we could make a full-time job? Prince of Suburbia was breaking even, but we really weren't sure if we could grow it into something bigger that could really make a profit. We felt like we could make a 3D game because we would be doing the art. We felt like we could build one that would eventually make money, but there would be a period where we weren't making any money. And so we had to save up for that. And, I think looking back, when we were talking about making this a business, I kept kind of feeling really skeptical. Like, this seems a little too easy, right? Like, we really looked at the market. We had a foot in the door for many years, and we'd watched how the market grew and watched how it evolved. And we felt like we really understood how to make money in this industry. And it didn't seem super complicated. And that part, I think, was true. What we've learned is that our assumptions about how to make money in this industry were true. And it isn't super complicated. If you look at what's out there, it's pretty obvious how you make money. I think my mistake in thinking that it was easy is not recognizing some of the privileges that we had, or some of the choices that we made that allowed us to do this, that are huge barriers of entry for other people. Yeah, now I would say that the industry, I wouldn't call it easy. I would call it predictable. I feel like there are certain things that you can do that will basically guarantee that you earn money unless you make some huge mistake along the way. But a big barrier to entry as far as making this your full-time job and really scaling from just a small passion hobby project to, being your full-time income is having that financial flexibility to survive the period where you're not making any money. And that period can go on for quite a while. If we hadn't had the first game already basically halfway finished by the time that we tried to make this a full-time business, I don't know that we would have been able to survive long enough for A Shot in the Dark to become profitable. So that was kind of just a a privilege that we had made the choice to start really early on. So we already had a halfway finished game, because typically it takes multiple years to get to that point. Another good choice that we made that allowed us to have that financial flexibility is definitely thanks to the Omega and his interest in Fire, which I know he loves to talk about. So I'll let him talk a little bit about that.
And real quick too, I just want to mention, one of the things that you were bringing up is that we've also talked about before, which is if you're making even just decent decisions with this, not the best, not the perfect ones as an adult game developer, like you're going to make money, right? And so one of the things we've talked about is there's a relatively high floor for these games, which is a part of the incentive to making them as compared to like actual indie games that are not adult related. That being said, the ceiling is lower, typically speaking, than an actual, like, for example, AAA game or a game that just kind of goes viral, like let's say Vampire Survivors or something.
For sure. Yeah. I think we are a perfect example of, like I said, if you hope to make money, whether it's a small amount or a big amount, there are certain decisions that you would make. It's not like there's one decision you have to make in order to make money, but there are certain decisions that you make that will make it easier to make money. And there's some decisions that you can make early on that would make it really hard to make money later. So just kind of, we can do a whole episode about that in and of itself. That's part of where we haven't always made the perfect decisions. Knowing what we know today, we wouldn't make the exact same decisions that we already made. And probably a year from now, we will know even more and the market will have changed and evolved, and we would probably feel differently still. So the reality is you don't have to be perfect, but you do kind of need to make, there's certain decisions you can make that can really make or break it. But outside of that, it is a very flexible industry as far as there's a lot of room to make mistakes and still be profitable.
Also, as Jocelyn was saying, like leading into the whole FIRE thing, for those who don't know what FIRE is, that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. For a lot of people, that can mean or does mean like they want to save up as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, invest it, and then live off of that for the rest of their lives so they can retire and not have to work ever again. For a lot of other people, that means basically being able to not have to work in jobs they don't want to work in anymore. For us, it just basically means that we wanted to work at the jobs that we want to work without having to put ourselves into other jobs where they're less than ideal, or we have bosses that don't listen to us or are stupid or have a really dumb requests. And then, that kind of wears on you as the years go on. For me personally, I was tired of working directly for the man, as I call him, like I said, the bad bosses or the work that I just simply wasn't interested in. Like that was soul sucking for me. And that was a big motivation for me to initially seek out something which I learned, as I said, was FIRE. For more context, like when we both did this full time, until we were actually making some money to live off of, we saved up 30 or 35,000 in the bank, and a lot of those costs went into the business, but they were also like going to our groceries and the mortgage and such. The honest truth is, in 2022, when we were both doing it full time, we were living like church mice, and we weren't really, spending big on anything. We weren't eating out. We were just cooking at home and not doing a whole lot because we were putting our heads down and really trying to develop these games, as quickly as possible, but also in a way that we were happy with.
In my experience talking with aspiring devs, a lot of them do say that they would eventually like to develop this into a full-time business for a lot of the same reasons that we wanted to make this a full-time business, which is to have that flexibility to work for yourself, to not have a boss, to be the one that gains the value from the things that you create. I think that's something I didn't really understand until we built this business and we're working for ourselves for a while, that I looked back on all the years that I had worked for other people and how hard I was working. And I never made any more money from it. I never really got any value from it, aside from I was just working hard and the people above me were benefiting from it, but I didn't get extra value from that. And so I know a lot of developers feel that way too, that they want to create something for themselves. They want to have their own business. For some developers, it's even, more serious than that. We certainly know developers that for them, this is a way for them to escape a bad situation in the country where they're living. We know developers that live in war-torn countries, and the money that they can make from adult game development is much more than they could make in almost any job in their country. And the income potential from these games is what will allow them, or has allowed them, to escape to better situations. And so just seeing things like that makes me really happy and makes me hope that players really don't see devs that are making money as being greedy or just wanting to pinch every last penny out of players. it really is a lot of work, and it really is a labor of love for all developers. I don't know anybody that could do this just for the money, because it is really hard. You have to love it. You have to enjoy it. But making money on top of it really is that extra validation of, I've created something that people love. They believe that it has value and they want to give me money for it. And then I can use that money to improve my life and the life of people around me and the lives of other people in the development industry. And so for all those reasons, it's just a really amazing industry to work in. And I'm so grateful that we are able to make money and to be profitable and successful, because if we hadn't found a way to make this financially sustainable, we would not be making games. And that's just the truth. It would not be worth it. We wouldn't have time. So the only way that we can continue doing this is if it's financially sustainable. But all that said, most developers do start with zero. Most of them start with nothing. We know many developers that have started with nothing. I definitely hope that aspiring devs know that you do not need to jump in and buy a $5,000 computer right off the bat and a bunch of assets and, or hire a 2D artist for thousands of dollars a month. Those things are just not necessary. We know lots of devs that have started with their subpar potato computers. They have optimized what they had and made it work to make renders. They've done the best that they could with what they had in order to build something that they could grow into something more and then afford more things. So yet again, another reason to start small. So you can make a smaller game that is maybe lower quality because you have lower hardware, but that the money that you make from that will pay for you to get better hardware and make a better game later on.
We did not both go into this full time at the same time. And you can kind of put that in the same box as there's a lot of adult game developers out there who do this on a part-time basis to start off with while they're still working their full-time job or whatever it might be. That way it's less of a risk. Like if you just willy-nilly, no plan, are like, okay, I want to start this adult game and I want to do it full-time and I'm not going to plan financially or anything like that, then yeah, that's a much bigger risk than if you, let's say, save up a bunch of money to fund yourself through it or to develop the game part-time until it can sustain you full-time.
For sure. Yeah, there's obviously so much more that we could say about this topic. I hope it's obvious that we're very passionate about both financial independence and financial freedom and how you can gain that through adult game development. We are always super excited to talk to aspiring devs and counsel them in achieving whatever their goals are. Even if your goal is not to make it a full-time profitable business like we have, we certainly always are excited to talk to aspiring devs about what they need to do to reach whatever their goals are. So we hope that if you are an aspiring developer, that these tips were helpful. And even if you're not, I hope you found them interesting.
What Jocelyn's saying is true. We really do enjoy seeing other aspiring devs kind of rise up out there. And then we do like to hear from them. And if you have any questions, please, like with the fans and supporters too, we're certainly willing to, talk with you and see if we can help you along the way, give you any pointers we have. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Through email, Patreon, Twitter, Instagram, or any other platform we're on. We're always happy to hear from aspiring devs, fans, players alike. So do not be afraid to reach out. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Seedy AF podcast. We hope we planted some seeds with you. See you next time.
Bye.